Like many popular games, Baldur's Gate 3 gave players some accessibility features beyond just the basics. First, we will take a look at the basic accessibility features. In this section, you can see features such as a toggle for camera shake to help reduce visual fatigue and motion sickness, colorblind mode which adds a very basic filter that we will talk about later, longer mouse interaction for players who accidentally click on items by encouraging intentional clicking, text size which we will go into later as well, and customized dialogue options. Most of the basic video settings affect the quality of graphics and the speed or frame rate that the computer can play. For some players, changing lighting, such as increasing gamma so dark areas are not as black, can help them be able to see areas that would otherwise be invisible to them. In some games where sneaking and hiding in dark areas is important, this can also make it easier for players who need a greater amount of contrast to play a standard game. Players can also change the depth of field, fog, and level of detail that is shown on screen, which can increase and decrease the amount of visual attention needed. Of course, the more detail added means players need higher specs of the system running, such as a better graphics card or RAM. Another feature that can help with attention as well as vision is highlights. Highlights can be turned on to let you know where your character and teammates are, where your enemies are, and where NPC or non-playable characters are. In Baldur's Gate 3, you can use highlights to indicate actions during combat. Highlights can be circles underneath, outlines, or both. You can see here that the playable character and teammates are in standard view at the beginning, and when the highlights are turned on, each character that you can interact with has an outline. In this case, current party members are in purple and blue, other group members are in green, and neutral characters are in yellow. Like many other games, text size and opacity can greatly help with understanding dialogue. In Baldur's Gate 3, there are many places where reading text is important, such as in making action choices that reflect how the story plays out, conversations with characters, environmental dialogue you see pop over people's heads, and text in books and scrolls. While you can't change the font type or colors, changing the opacity can make it easier to read by creating higher contrast between the background and the text. In this example, the text size is small and has a faint translucent background. By turning on the opacity and increasing the size, the text becomes much easier to read. Similarly, there are many books and scrolls that you find around the map that tell you important parts of the story, or some that are just fun to read. Players are unable to change the background color or font of the books, unfortunately, but changing the text size can go a long way toward making it easier to understand and help with the strain of looking at large amounts of text. Some interesting extra changes you can make to the graphics include what is called God rays, bloom, and subsurface lighting. In God rays, you can toggle what is essentially a sunbeam from light sources reflecting on dust and other particles. Bloom causes glowing from items in the environment, such as around candles and bioluminescent mushrooms. Subsurface scattering has a similar feature around more realistic lighting that considers reflections coming from underneath an object. Colorblind mode is a rather controversial feature that in most games does not actually allow for useful changes. Firstly, it affects the whole screen with just a toggle for on and off, and does not allow for sliding of hues or intensity and often doesn't reflect practical accommodations. A more useful feature would be the ability to customize the color of every important factor, such as enemies, which are typically marked in red, and party members, which in this game are marked as blue, purple, or green. One of the most common color blindness types affects red and green, which are some of the most important color indicators that players need. For example, on the minimap, players are marked in blue and enemies are in red. In all three color filter types, the players are changed to almost the exact same shade of purple, yet the enemies and warning areas are still in red with very little contrast or shades changed. Since there is no ability to change the hue or even the color completely away from red, these filters are only useful to a very small number of people who are colorblind. One useful audio feature is occlusion. Occlusion means that sound is both directional and varies in level depending on if the sound is behind an object or if something walks between the sound source and the player or camera. This can be very useful for players who benefit from realistic sounding cues to help them determine the direction to go or if an enemy is hiding nearby. For players who have hearing difficulties or sensitivities to sound, volume can be changed from high dynamic, meaning sound is more realistic with whispers being quiet and explosions loud, or low dynamic, meaning volume is consistent regardless of the source. Combined with mono audio, this feature can allow for players who have limited hearing in one or both ears to give them the ability to hear everything regardless of direction. Lastly, there are automatic features that can help players limit the amount of extra clicks as they explore the environment and collect items. These can be further customized through keybinds that allow you to customize every action. Keybinds can even allow players in Baldur's Gate 3 to use only the keyboard to play or only the mouse to play, depending on needs. Using a controller is also possible, however there are some gameplay features that are limited due to the game being built primarily for mouse and keyboard. Baldur's Gate 3 should be praised for its accessibility features, but also evaluated for its gaps. Especially being a big title, it should be looked upon as an example and create further discussion for both players and developers to think about where improvements can be made for accessibility.